The Torah instructs us, "L'kachtem lachem b'yom harishon," on the first day of sukkos, pre-eitz hador. So the Torah does not identify what the pre-eitz hador is. So the Gemara in Sukkot discusses it and gives, so to speak, identity to the pre-eitz hador, that it's commonly, what we commonly call the esrog. It's hador bilono, chol shona v'shona, that it's able to stay on the tree the entire year. It grows with a great deal of water, and it has this beautiful appearance, which is also a hador, and a fragrance. So from time immemorial, it has been identified as being the esrog. Now, the esrog originally grows only in the Mediterranean areas. It's a citrus fruit, needs a warm climate, so it only grew in the Mediterranean basin. And there was always an industry of esrogim here in Eretz Yisrael and from countries in the Mediterranean. When the temple was destroyed and the Jews no longer lived in Eretz Yisrael, the esrog almost disappeared from the country, as did most of the fruit. The country became barren. The esrogim were amongst the Jews who lived in Bovel and in Turkey. So those esrogim came from Greece and from the Greek islands. And they are what we call Yanava esrogim. And the Jews that lived in Morocco and in North Africa, so they had esrogim from Morocco. And then from Spain, again, they imported from Morocco, but Spain also grows esrogim because it has this Mediterranean basin climate. However, when the Jews moved from there, the Ashkenazim came. The Ashkenazim were in France, and then later in Germany, and then later in Eastern Europe. There are no esrogim there. The climate is such that there can be no esrogim grown. Though in Provence, in southern France, they also grew esrogim. So then there arose a question. The question begins already in the time of the Rishonim. The people who grew the esrogim for commercial reasons wanted the esrog to be very attractive, naturally, but they wanted it to be strong, that it shouldn't be subject to all sorts of diseases which afflict fruit grown in our part of the country. Even today in the world, there's such a thing called the Mediterranean fruit fly. So, for instance, in the United States, you can't import any fruit from the Mediterranean at all, because it may be afflicted with the fruit fly, will then destroy the fruits in the United States. There's an exemption for the state of Israel. It's one of the many things that the state of Israel is treated differently by the United States than other countries. And therefore, if the Ministry of Agriculture here in Israel attests that the esrog is free from the Mediterranean fruit fly, they will allow it to be imported, and they will allow it to be sold in the United States. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of esrogim, which if the United States had to inspect, it would be at enormous cost and difficulty. In any event, In order to buttress the esrog, the esrog growers began to graft it with the lemon. We have a lemon tree outside. The lemon is a very hardy fruit. It resists all sorts of insects, and it grows very strong. So in order to protect the esrogim, they grafted it with the lemon. So that arose, with that arose a shaila. It's already mentioned in the early Rishonim 1,000 years ago, whether such an esrog is kosher, because it's murkov, it's grafted from, it's not 100% esrog. So there were Rishonim that held that if it's 51% esrog, it's good enough. It's hard to tell 51% or not, but you can make an experiment. It'll cost you your esrog, but you can make an experiment. You cut the esrog in half. In the middle, there's a core. The core has seeds. If the seeds are vertical, it's an esrog. If the seeds are horizontal, it's a lemon. So because of the necessity that there were no esrogim in Europe, in Eastern Europe for certain, there were no esrogim. So there were special people that were sent to the Middle East to bring back esrogim. That's why you have a name, an Ashkenazic name, Citron. People are named Citron. Citron. Because they were, so to speak, in that business. They were sent early on. It took months to come back with esrogim. And esrogim were not plentiful in Eastern Europe. And most Jews did not have an esrog and lulav of their own. It was rather the tzibur that had it. And even as late when I was a child in America yet, I remember that in my father's shul, which had 750 men in the minyan, there were 3 esrogim, plus the 3 esrogim that the shul had. So before Hallel, people lined up for an hour to bench lulav and esrog, and then they took it up to the ladies to bench lulav and esrog. So it was like an hour and a half before Hallel that people were occupied with benching lulav and esrog. And the Mishnah Brura quotes that he's got a whole section what to do. Sometimes there wasn't even an esrog in town, so they had to bring an esrog from the next town. So he writes how long to wait and how, until they bring the esrog and what to do about it. So that was the situation. And in Eastern Europe, in Lithuania especially, in Poland as well. So really only chosen few, the wealthy, mostly the Rabbonim, had esrogim. But the Yamcha, the regular people, us normal ones, they didn't have a lulav and esrog. They benched on the lulav and esrog from the tzibur. So in our time, this is one of the great revolutions that the state of Israel has brought to the Jewish people. We don't realize how great the changes are in Jewish life simply because of the existence of the state of Israel. So they began to make an industry out of esrogim. Last year, there were 1.5 million esrogim from Israel sold. So I don't know what you pay for an esrog or not, but it's a big business. And it became really a large industry. And almost everybody, Baruch Hashem, today can have a little of an esrog. And even children have, and people take it for granted that we're going to have an esrog and lulav. And not only that, they will have a choice of what to have. So that again is something to put into perspective, to realize how fortunate our generation is, because our ancestors never dreamt of having, that every house should be able to have an esrog and lulav. That just didn't exist. In the late 1940s, after the state was declared, and the industry started, so the Chazon Ish, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, inspected a certain pardes in Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak then was full of pardesim, today it's full of apartment buildings. But then it was like open space. And by experiment, by cutting them open, they determined that, to his satisfaction, that those esrogim were bilti murkovim, that they were not grafted with lemon, and that the seeds from the esrog were pure esrog. And therefore what they did is they took those esrogim, and they took the seeds out of it, and they planted new esrog trees. And from that pardes, hundreds of pardesim now exist that produce that esrog. That is becheskas bilti murkov. It has a chazaka that you can rely on, that it is not a grafted esrog. And I would say that 95% of the esrogim, certainly that are sold here in Israel, fall under that category because of the fact that that's what's good, that things are commercial. Because when things are commercial, there's competition, and therefore everybody has to have something special. And you could not, they don't want to rely, we don't want to rely any longer on the heterim which existed at the time of the Rishonim, that Murkovim were allowed. Everybody wants to have an esrog that's bilti Murkov, 100% esrog. And so therefore, where there's a demand, then they can produce to meet the demand. And that's the situation that we have today. The same problem existed in lulavim. In the United States, we always got lulavim from Arizona. During the war, during the Second World War, we got esrogim from Arizona, which were awful. They were gigantic, and they had no really appearance to them, but that's all that you had, because you couldn't bring esrogim from Eretz Israel or from the Middle East in the middle of the war. So this is all an industry that is developed afterwards. The same thing with hadassim. So hadassim, the Gemara describes for us, there's a real hadas, and there's something that's called a hadas shote, which looks like the real hadas, but it isn't. And the difference is the real hadas has 3 leaves that grow from the same pod. Well, hadas shote does not have 3, it has 2 and 1 from the back. So again, in Eastern Europe, where they couldn't get anything, so there were many that were matir the hadas shote entirely. And most of the poskim were matir it if it was a majority. If you had 2 or 3 pods was enough. But today, again, in our time, because of the industry and because of the blessings that we have, so everybody has hadassim mishuloshim, hadassim that 3 leaves grow from the same pod. And it's an entire industry to plant and raise these hadassim.